Good morning, my friends. Welcome to our New Testament challenge, day 9. We are in the ninth chapter of Matthew today, and this is my reflections on that passage and on the actions and thoughts and motivations of Jesus here. So in chapter 9, we have several episodes that are here. Jesus heals a person who was paralyzed. He calls Matthew, the tax collector, to come and follow him. There's some questions about his disciples and why should they fast. And then there was a girl that was dead that Jesus raised from the dead. And then there was a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years, who all she had to do was, she said, I just need to touch his cloak. And then he heals 2 blind men, and then a person who was mute, a demon was demon possessed. The demon was driven out, and the man could speak again. And this part of the gospel is just chock full of good stuff. And here, I think one of the things I want to reflect upon today is the motivation behind what Jesus does. The first episode here where he heals the man paralyzed, and some men brought him, his friends brought him, and Jesus was amazed at their faith that they would do this for their friend. And he says, hey, take heart, your sins are forgiven. And then the Pharisees who were listening, watching, were saying, how can you do that? Only God can heal, can forgive sins. And Jesus talks about the correlation between the forgiveness of sins and the healing of the person. And not just physical healing, although that's what this was. I think it meant wholeness, shalom, the healing of the whole body. And so he says there's a correlation there between the forgiveness of sins and the healing of the person. And, why should one be... they're both just as difficult and just as powerful and just as necessary and just as driven by the power and the promise of God. And so Jesus takes this time to talk about his motivation. He calls Matthew and the tax collector. Now, again, we've heard about this before. Tax collectors, where they're not real popular today. The tax IRS is not real popular today, but back then a tax collector was one who was a local, and one who was paid by the Romans, the occupying army, and one who also, generally speaking, would he got to keep any extra that he brought in. And so usually a tax collector was one who would charge extra. And and the people really couldn't say anything because the Romans would send the soldiers, And so they paid the regular tax, and then they paid the local, and the tax collector would reap that. And so people knew that. And, he didn't care. He was rich and everything, but it kept him away from general normal society. And so he was not welcome in the synagogue. He was not welcome in the temple. He was not welcome in religious Jewish homes. And so generally what happened was that he hung out with other tax collectors and other sinners, people who were outside the faith, and those who they may have been grown up there, but then are like, I'm no good. I've given up. I'm going to live my life this way. And so he had his own circle of friends. And so when Jesus called him, Matthew was so excited that Jesus had chosen him. He invited all of his friends, all from his circle, all the sinners and all the other tax collectors that were there. And the Pharisees were just shocked at how Jesus chose to eat with these people. Because when you eat with someone at that time, we talk about table fellowship. For them, when you ate at someone's table, there was generalized understanding of acceptance of that person. It was more than simply a friend. You were opening your home. You were opening hospitality, and the person who accepted that hospitality also was there was this understanding that you accepted this person. And so when Jesus went and ate at Matthew's house, when Jesus ate at Zacchaeus' house, we hear that story later. There was this understanding, general understanding, that he was accepting them for who they are. And the Pharisees and some of the religious leaders were wondering, Jesus, why are you eating with sinners and tax collectors? And Jesus' response was, I came to heal. Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and the righteous, the healthy don't need a doctor. It is the ones who understand that they are sinful. The ones, and again, this is that understanding is you cannot be healed until you accept that you have an illness. If you don't, then you're not going to bother going to the doctor if it doesn't matter to you. And so, the sick, the sinners, recognized that they needed someone, and so that's who Jesus came for. And then I thought this was interesting. The woman, again, the woman who had been bleeding 12 years, and then kind of the background of the story is very similar to Matthew, very similar to the lepers. She was someone who was outside of normal society. When a woman bled, once a month they were unclean. They were not welcomed into society. And so they would have to stay home. They would have to stay away from everybody else. And so this woman had been bleeding for 12 years, not just 1 week a month, but every day, all the time. And so she really had been outside of normal society for 12 years. She had spent all her money going to doctor, trying to get something like that, and she was growing increasingly desperate. And like the centurion, she recognized the authority found in Jesus, and she said, I've got to, if I can just touch his cloak, I believe that he will heal me. And I love this. He's in the crowd, and and one of the other Gospels talks about this. It says, he walking through a crowd, and he says, wait a second, who touched me? And his disciples said, Lord, you're in a crowd. Everybody's touching you. And he said, no, I felt power go out from me. Someone had faith. Someone reached out and touched me in faith. And that's just powerful to hear that. And then he talks about healing the blind and more. There's some good stuff in here. And again, part of this is the motivation, the purpose, the thinking, the rationale behind what Jesus does. There's more to it than just on the surface. And as we read this together, and as we go through this whole book, and as we pull it together, this is one of the reasons I love doing this type of challenge, is that before we would read a passage here and a passage there and a little bit here and a little bit there. But now, as we read the whole thing together, from the beginning of a book to the end, we can kind of really see and sense the flow of things. And we can see how Jesus built upon his actions, and built upon his teachings, and built upon his healings, and how they all came together, and how he had this ultimate goal of healing the whole person at the very end. So this is good stuff. And I look forward to talking with you tomorrow about Matthew chapter 10. Thanks a lot, my friends.